The Atlanta Braves should still be favored to win the National League East in 2025. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Friday, December 13th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well. And as always, you can find all of my written work. BravesToday.com is the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And to wrap up the week, I want to talk about the National League East in 2025. A little fun fact here, when you are signed up as media for different things, whether it's the team's mailing list for the media, whether it's in the MLB credentialing site, things like that, your email address is given to different companies and whatnot. And I got an email from a sportsbook on Thursday afternoon about 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And they were waiting for Juan Soto to sign. They finally put up odds on the MLB season for 2025. Who's going to win the American and National Leagues, and who's going to win each division. And I thought the National League East was a little bit interesting. And I wanted to break down the email because when we got the odds from them, the Atlanta Braves are favored to win the National League East in 2025. 3-2 odds, that translates to plus 150. The New York Mets are in second at 8-5 odds at plus 160. And the Philadelphia Phillies are in third with 11-5 odds at plus 220. The Nationals are fourth place at 100-1. The Marlins are in fifth place at 150-1. And if you want to go put money on the Miami Marlins to win the National League East in 2025, I'm going to encourage you to seek some help because that's just not normal. But I want to talk about this division, and I want to talk about how Atlanta matches up to New York and how Atlanta matches up to Philly, and whether this is the correct order or not for these three teams. So let's start with the New York Mets. And interestingly, when you look at the odds for the Mets, they have the second best odds of winning the division. But when you look at the National League, Dodgers are the favorites, right? It's going to be like this for 5 years, folks. Get used to this. 9-4 odds, that's plus 225 for the Dodgers to win the National League pennant. But the Mets are in second place, second best odds to win the National League pennant at 15-4. That's plus 375. By comparison, the Braves are 5-1 odds to win the National League, with the Phillies at 6-1. The Padres are at 15-2, which you can think of as 7.5-1. The Cubs are then there's a big jump. Cubs at 18-1, Diamondbacks and Brewers at 22-1, Giants at 35-1. So they really see it as, I'm going to say, really as a 5-team race. Dodgers, Mets, Braves, Phillies, Padres, as of right now. And it's odd to me that the Mets have the second best odds of winning the division, but they jump the Braves in the odds for the National League. Some of that recency bias. Who were the two teams in the NLCS? The Dodgers and the Mets. But when you look at how these teams match up, I find it really interesting to think that the Mets really even deserve to be in second place, even with how good Juan Soto is and how well Francisco Lindor played last year. So let's go position by position and look at Braves versus Mets. And then after the break, we'll go Braves versus Phillies and see how well these teams match up. The caveat here is all of these teams still have work to do in the offseason. So some of this projection may be baking in that these teams are going to make other moves, but maybe the sports book, and I'm not saying the name because they don't pay us for that, no free pub here. Maybe the sports book thinks the Mets are going to do more than the Braves, or that the Phillies aren't really going to do anything of note. Like maybe that's all baked into these projections. Maybe some of this is just we want to capitalize on Mets fans being hyped that they got Juan Soto and get them to give us more money. Remember that gambling odds aren't always supposed to exactly predict what's going to happen. They're supposed to usually try to move the money around where you're not overly exposed to any one fan base, any one team, that kind of thing, right? So the Dodgers and the Braves line up. Let's go position by position. I think that's probably easier than trying to go batting order because the batting orders are so different. We're going to use the Fangraphs roster resource tool for this right now. So it's going to account for injuries. This is obviously their projection of who's going to play where. We do have still signings left to go in free agency where we think teams will improve and won't improve. As of right now, first base and third base, the corner infield spots, absolutely an advantage for the Atlanta Braves, okay? The Braves bring back Matt Olson and Austin Riley. There's zero question there. Unless injuries strike, which happened to Riley last year, both those guys are going to play close to 162 games. Your corresponding other options right now with the Mets, the first baseman is penciled in as Mark Vientos. He played a lot of third last year. He is better as a first baseman. He's not a great defensive third baseman. I remember when he was a prospect, watching him in person and writing some of this up. And so they have him moving to first with Brett Beatty getting another opportunity to stick in the majors at third. I do still think that the Mets could pursue a reunion with Pete Alonso. I don't know if the money's going to work out like Pete Alonso wants it to, but unathletic first baseman with bad defense typically don't age. We're going to call that the Ryan Howard corollary. I don't know if Pete Alonso is going to see the market that he expects, and I do think eventually he'll end up coming back to the Mets. So if that happens, Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos are closer, but still behind Matt Olson and Austin Riley. Okay. Second base for both teams, Jeff McNeil for the Mets versus Ozzie Albies for the Braves. I've got this for Atlanta still. McNeil struggled last year. He batted .238, 12 homers, 5 stolen bases. Ozzie was obviously hurt. It's an odd number year, so we have reason to think that Ozzie's not going to miss a lot of time. If you go back and look at his full seasons, 21 and 23, his hurt years were 22 and 24. So it makes sense that if you're trying to evaluate these teams, you would think, oh yeah, Atlanta has the advantage because you expect Ozzie Albies to be on the field over like this year, given the injuries. And then when they're both healthy, I like Ozzie over Jeff McNeil. I think the power's better. I don't think the defensive drop-off to Ozzie is that significant to make up for the much better power. Shortstop, there's no way to argue this is not the Mets. Francisco Lindor is an MVP candidate. He's getting paid like one, too, if you didn't realize. Francisco Lindor's contract, I believe he's getting paid $34 million in 2025. So, yeah, he better be playing like an MVP candidate. He obviously was last year, batted .273, 33 home runs, 29 stolen bases. He easily outclasses Orlando Arcia. I would go on a limb and say Francisco Lindor was also better than Orlando's predecessor, Dansby Swanson, and that's just how it is. You hate to hear that. Behind the plate is an interesting one here. Francisco Alvarez versus Sean Murphy. Alvarez struggled last year. They dropped him down to like 8th in the lineup. Murphy, after coming back from injury, I'm convinced wasn't fully healthy the rest of the year. He was in that heavy timeshare. We did a show last month. Justin Toscano wrote an article about this, I want to say Wednesday. Sean Murphy's going to play a lot more in 2025. I am convinced him getting back to playing 4 to 5 games a week, is going to be the key to him performing like we know he's capable of. If his best stretch he's had in Atlanta, that first half of 2023, He had a month while Travis d'Arnaud was on the IL with the concussion that he played almost every single day. I think he started all but 2 games over a 30-something day stretch. I'm going to give Sean Murphy the nod over Francisco Alvarez as well. I think Murphy's better defensively. I think Murphy has more potential offensively than Francisco Alvarez does. The question for both of them is going to be, can they recover a bit from where they were, from their struggles that they had last year? The outfield is where this gets really interesting, right? Because Juan Soto's in right. We don't know when we're going to get Ronald Acuna Jr. in right field. But coming off of the injury, it's hard to argue that Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to be better than Juan Soto in 2025. So that is a tip there to the New York Mets. Center field, Michael Harris. It doesn't matter who, if it's Tyrone Taylor, Jose Siri, it doesn't matter. Give me Michael Harris 7 days a week and Sunday after church. And Brian Sittker agrees with me. His media availability at the winter meetings on Monday, he actually talked about Michael Harris. The quote here, he was asked about what Michael Harris being in the lineup on opening day and hopefully being healthy, how that could bridge a gap to the standard outfield because you had to wait for Ronald to get here and all of that. And his answer, his quote here, I think it could be huge. I think Michael was ready to do that. I think these last couple of years, he's probably learning his body and the grind that the major league season is. I'm sure he'll, as they go in and what they end up doing, adjusting their workouts in the offseason, we see what the guy can do. He's a special talent. If we can keep him on the field for 150 plus games, he's got a chance of being a really good and strong middle of the back of the lineup guy. I legitimately think, and I've said this on the show a few times, I think Michael Harris can be not only a Gold Glove candidate, but if everything breaks right, if he's fully healthy and hits all year, I think he can be a 30-30 guy in 2025. If it's me, he's leading off to start the season. He is the first batter to come to the plate for the Braves on opening day in San Diego. And I don't know when Ronald comes back if I want to take Michael Harris out of the top of the lineup. Even if you put Ronald back at 1, I still think Michael Harris should drop no farther down than 2. I don't think Ozzie Albies, like, Michael doesn't walk a lot, but I don't think Ozzie's the best fit for that 2 hole. I want Michael Harris getting as many at-bats as possible because I think he can be special. You look at left field, Brandon Nimmo really struggled last year. 224 with a 399 slug. He still hit 23 home runs and 15 stolen bases. But Jared Kelenic also really struggled. I think you do have to give this over to the Mets. You do have to give them, right now, Brandon Nimmo over Jared Kelenic. Now, obviously, Atlanta is going to be upgrading in the outfield. And if Jared Kelenic is a starter, as we all expect to start the year, he's not guaranteed that spot as you go into once Ronald's back. If Ronald's playing every day, Jared Kelenic's not guaranteed to play every day. Brandon Nimmo had 663 plate appearances last year. He plays every day. I do think that you can find somebody better than Brandon Nimmo in a platoon with Jared Kelenic, or if Jared Kelenic clicks, and you can take that. You look at the pitching staff. This is where I think the Mets are going to spend most of their time. This pitching staff is really rough. Kodai Senga coming back. He pitched 5 1/3 innings in the regular season last year. They were against Atlanta, actually, before he suffered that injury. Frankie Montas as their number 2. David Peterson, Clay Holmes, Paul Blackburn. I am not at all scared of that rotation, and I'm not scared of facing any of those pitchers, with the exception of maybe when Kodai Senga is on with that ghost fork, he's tough to hit. Atlanta gets the advantage on the rotation there. Sale, Lopez, Schwellenbach, Anderson, Holmes, right there. Give me Atlanta over these 5 guys for the Mets. Bullpen, Edwin Diaz is one of the highest paid closers in baseball. Raisel Iglesias is better. I like Raisel Iglesias over Edwin Diaz. I do think Iglesias is more consistent. After this, some of your setup guys, you've got Jose Butto, Reed Garrett, Danny Young. Give me Pierce Johnson, Dylan Lee, Aaron Bummer. I do think one of the weaknesses here of the Mets, they only have one lefty projected in the pen as of right now, and that's Danny Young. Whereas for the Braves, you're going to have Bummer, you're going to have Lee. We think they're going to try to add one more. You've got good velocity with Daisy Hernandez. I like the Braves bullpen. Recapping here, the Mets get right field, the Mets get shortstop. I gave him a third thing, and I gave him left field. Left field with Brandon Nimmo. Outside of that, I like Atlanta's roster better at most positions on the field, so I think it's right that the Braves are favored to win the division over the Mets. In just a second, Philly at 3, though? Is Philly really the third best team in this division? We'll break it down and how they compare to Atlanta next. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about the lines for the 2025 season. The Atlanta Braves are favored to win the division. They have the best odds in the National League East at 3-2. That's plus 150. The Mets are right behind them, 8-5 odds. That's plus 160. With the Phillies in third, 11-5 odds. That's plus 220. And then the Mets leapfrog the Braves in the National League pennant odds. Dodgers are the favorites at plus 225. Mets are second, 15-4, plus 375. Braves at 5-1. Phillies at 6-1. And Philly at 3 in this feels a little bit odd to me. If you think about it, they won the division last year. They were one of the best teams in baseball last year. Now, they lost in their first round matchup, just like Atlanta has in the last couple seasons. But for a majority of the year, Philly was the one of, if not the best teams in baseball. So looking at their lineup right now, and I just realized I never even talked about DH when it came to the Mets. I guess the Mets DH is Starling Marte right now. Marcell Ozuna's better. I didn't even think about who their DH was. That kind of tells you how they don't really have great options at DH there other than old man Starling Marte. When you look at the Phillies lineup, I don't understand how you can put the Phillies behind the Mets. DH, I would much rather have Kyle Schwarber than Starling Marte. 38 home runs. He didn't have a terrible batting average this year, 248, or I guess last year in 2024. Much better than he's done in the past. He stole 5 bases somehow. I don't quite know how he did that. But 366 on base was, I believe, the second highest of all of their starters behind just Bryce Harper. 485 slug was the second highest, again, just behind Bryce Harper. I like Kyle Schwarber. I think he's the second best DH. I'd take Marcell Ozuna over Kyle Schwarber, but I think Schwarber's the second best DH. I do think he's probably better at drawing walks than Marcell Ozuna is. You go to first base, Bryce Harper's one of the best players in baseball. It is a really close conversation for a lot of people on if they'd rather have Matt Olson or Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper obviously has the pedigree, right? He's won 2 MVPs, one of the best players of this generation. There's going to be some Braves fans who are going to be annoyed by this, but I'm going to say in a vacuum, most non-fans who are not picking off of emotion are taking Bryce Harper over Matt Olson, right? So you're taking both of them over Mark Vientos or Pete Alonso. That's why there's a feather in Philly's cap right there. They have that advantage, just like they have DH over the Mets. When you look at second base, Bryson Stott, 245, 11 homers, 32 stolen bases. I do think he gives you the speed aspect that you're not really getting with the Mets. Jose Iglesias was good last year. Jose Iglesias is no longer on this team. Jeff McNeil's coming back. 238 average, 5 stolen bases. I think the Phillies are better at second base than the Mets are. You look at shortstop. Trey Turner, controversial opinion. Trey Turner is not as good as everybody makes him out to be. I don't think defensively he's very good. 21 homers, 19 steals, 295 average. That is very useful. He does okay with runners in scoring position or with men on base. Offensively, he is still a good contributor. I don't think he needs to be playing shortstop. I think the big weakness of this Philly team is they are too okay with accepting below average production, either defensively or offensively. They've prioritized offense at shortstop. I think Trey Turner would be a much better second baseman. I've seen conversation about moving Trey Turner to the outfield. He played a little outfield when he was younger in his career. I do think Trey Turner, the second baseman, would be a lot more impactful than Trey Turner, the shortstop. But either way, not as good as Francisco Lindor. I'll be honest there. So, because Lindor is doing it defensively and offensively. Third base, up in the air for Philly, right? Alec Boehm. We don't know if he's going to stick around or if he'll get traded. 280 with 15 homers. I do think he's better than Brett Beatty. I do think he's better than Mark Vientos. So unless they trade him, that's another cap for the Mets. You look at right field, there's not even a debate. It's Juan Soto over Nick Castellanos. So, Nick Castellanos needs to be much better. He batted 254, I know, 23 homers. His defense was atrocious. He needs to play much better for that contract, but he's not better than Juan Soto. There's just no way he was going to do that. Center field, Johan Rojas over Tyrone Taylor. I think this is surprisingly close and interchangeable. Taylor batted 248 with 7 homers. Rojas batted 243 with 3 homers. He did steal more bases. I do think defensively he's better. So it's technically a push, but I'll give the credit to Philly on that one. You look at left field, that's usually Brandon Marsh versus Brandon Nimmo. Brandon Marsh's defense is better. He did technically bat. He batted 249, 16 homers, 19 steals. He performed Brandon Nimmo last year, who batted 224, although he had more homers with 23. It's a push, really. If you want to get picky on this, center field and right field are both pushes for these teams. And then the rotation is obviously better than New York's. Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Christopher Sanchez, Ranger Suarez is a very good 1 through 4. I like them better than I like any of. I would take 3 or 4 of those guys before I take anybody from the Mets except for maybe Kodai Senga. If you combine these two rotations, probably the only guy I'm taking from New York's rotation to make a 5 is Kodai Senga. And he's probably the 3 behind Wheeler and Sanchez. He's probably the 4. It's probably Wheeler, Sanchez, Nola, Kodai Senga, Ranger Suarez. That's my 1 through 5. Philly gets the advantage there. In the bullpen, Jordan Romano, they just signed him. Philly just signed him to be the closer out of Toronto. Hoping for a rebound year. He's not better than Edwin Diaz, but I do the rest of this bullpen better. I like Orion Kerkering. I like Jose Alvarado. Matt Strom was really strong last year with heavy usage. He threw 60-something innings. All of these relievers, all of their key relievers. Alvarado threw almost 62. Kerkering threw 63. Strom threw almost 63. They used the hell out of these guys, but they performed well. They all stepped up and they pitched really well last year. Another situation where there's closer, shortstop, right field. That's the only place where I have the Mets better than the Phillies. And besides, the Mets are the Mets. Last year was the first year they've really done anything. And I'll remind you, the Pirates have more NL East titles than the Mets, and the Pirates haven't been in the NL East in, I think, 50 years. It makes sense to me that the Braves are number 1, best odds to win the division. It doesn't make sense to me that the Mets are number 2 unless you're just overrating the impact of Juan Soto or you're just trying to get the money from Mets fans who are convinced that because they have Juan Soto, they are now World Series contenders. Because again, you lost a lot of pitching from this Mets team. You lost you lost some of your better performing infield pieces. Pete Alonso, Jose Iglesias, all gone. And the highly paid veterans you have in Nimmo and McNeil have not stepped up. They have not performed, or they did not last year. They did not perform to their contracts. This has been Braves Today for Friday, December 13th. If you're listening on audio, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Leave me a comment down below. I want to know what you think the order should be as of now in the National League East. Do you think that the only reason the Mets are in second place as of now is because we expect them to go sign a Corbin Burnes, bring back Pete Alonso, and do a bunch more adding? Or is this just the Juan Soto bump that they're getting because the sports books want the money from Mets fans. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.